nirasya sarva sandeham akikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashajitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payo Rasho Muda Kedato Bande Bhagavatan Iman Anudabam Mudna Nipatyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Namah Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamate Gati Matsarvasva Parambujo Radha Madana Mohana Kulari Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Sevak Raghunath Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Das Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Vandan Jaha Hite Vignanasha Bhishta Puram Adananastrinam dantoir yacheham puna puna Srimad Rupa Parambujo Julisam Janma Janmani. So by the grace of Shri Kaliyuga Bhavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojana Avatar, Prema Purushottam, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava Charjas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire in this world, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again today we will discuss Padyavali, and in particular the second verse of the Shikshastakam, spoken by Sriman Mahaprabhu. And today we resume in discussion of the final line of the verse where he says, durdaivam, īdṛśam, ihājani, nānurāgaḥ. I do not have any anurāga, I do not have any prema for your names. This is my durdaiva, this is my misfortune. So we discussed in the last class that the word durdaiva is built off the word daiva. The word daiva is defined as the accumulated past karma that one has committed. So the accumulation of unfavorable past karma is called durdaiva. However, not any type of karma can inhibit prema for the name arising, only specifically aparad, or offense to Hari's name, can inhibit prema for Hari's name arising. Therefore, it is to be inferred that the word durdaiva refers specifically to karma in the form of past namaparad. So, because of my having committed offenses to the name in the past, I do not have any prema for the name in the present. And this is an unfortunate condition. As the verse in the Padma Puran said, that if one commits offenses to the deity or to Bhagavan in general, one can be purified of those offenses by chanting the name. But if one commits offense to the name, then there is no other means to purify oneself. Those offenses to the name must be rectified by taking shelter in the name. So to do that, one must, as Baladeva Dibhushan explained in a comment that we discussed earlier, to quote, Avishranti prayuktani artakarani cha. For the names to be effective in purifying one of offense, one must engage in them incessantly. And Baladeva Dibhushan explains that, quote, incessant engagement or incessant chanting refers to forming the resolve to no longer commit aparad in the future, and then successfully fulfilling that resolve in the course of one's continued chanting. So whether one 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, constantly vibrates the name with one's mouth or in one's mind, that may or may not be. But if one can successfully refrain from committing any further offense, then the chanting that one does will purify one of the past offense, and to the extent that one is purified, to that extent the disposition to remain offenseless will become second nature, and prema will have no further obstacle from arising within the heart. So, in order to successfully do that and avoid these offenses and have a meaningful resolve to avoid them, we have to know what they are. We have to clearly understand what is aparad if we hope to avoid it. It's not that I didn't know, so I couldn't have done it, right? Rather, it's like the law. Whether you know it or not, if you break it, you're still held accountable. If you do something that you didn't know was illegal, you still are held accountable in the court for having committed the action, whether you knew it or not. So similarly, whether you understand or not, you're still accountable to avoiding offense as per the way Bhagavan considers what is offense or not. Because Vaishnavas may not take offense at persons wronging them, but Bhagavan doesn't like it when people wrong his bhaktas. So, for that reason, it's important to understand what are the types of namaparad, and therefore understand how to avoid them. So, in our last class, we discussed the first two offenses to the holy name as per the Padma Puran, as well as the commentaries on these descriptions of these offenses given by Jiva Gosvami and Sanatana Gosvami in the nija-sarva-śaktis on Hari Bhakti Vilas and the Bhakti Sandarbha. So we'll continue with the same discussion. We'll proceed now from offense number 3, and we'll look at the commentaries given by Sanatana Pad and Jiva Pad on these statements. So I'm picking up from, Padma Puran 425.17. It says, number 3, disrespect for the Guru and defamation of the Shrutis and Shastras are offenses to the name. Also, assumption of mere praise, artavad, and fabrication, kalpana, in regard to Hari's name are offenses to the name. The purification of one who has the intention of sinning on the basis of the name's power to dispel sin, which is an offense to the name, certainly does not occur by means of regulations. Which is a roundabout way of saying, if you think, oh, I can commit this offense because later I can rectify it by chanting Harinam, and therefore you intentionally commit offense thinking I can use Harinam like a cleaning agent to absolve me of any consequence of what I did. If you commit offense intentionally trying to use Harinam as a means of getting yourself out of the consequences of it, then that is an especially severe offense, and afterwards, even if you try to atone for that offense, the atonements that you accept won't work. So, we'll look now at how the acharyas discuss these points. And one note is that neither Sanatana Pad nor Jiva Pad comment on the offense of disrespect for the Guru or Guru Avagya. So we can assume that the explanation that was given in regard to offense to the Vaishnava applies in the same in regard to disrespect of the Guru, because they don't offer any further elaboration on the meaning. So the 6 types of offense to the Vaishnava: to defame them, to physically harm them, to get angry with them, to not be happy to see them, to not respectfully greet them, etc. All of these also apply in regard to the Guru. Then, now we'll come to the nija-sarva-śaktis on the 4th offense. So he says, defamation of the Shrutis and Dharma Shastras is an offense to the name. Also, is stated in the sense of conjunction. Fabrication of praise, artavad, that is, considering the praise of Hari's name in the Shastra mere hyperbole, or, in other words, considering that praise in regard to Hari's name is just fabrication, and not rather truly existent, is an offense to the name. This is the meaning. is fabricated, kalpyate, is an alternate reading. That is, it is an offense to opine the praise of Hari's name in the Shastra is just fabricated. Alternately, there are two offenses mentioned here. The first being considering the praise in regard to Hari's name to be mere hyperbole, and the second being fabrication in regard to Hari's name as well, meaning uselessly fabricating another meaning of Hari's name based on misunderstanding and rejection of its, that is the name's actual meaning and greatness. So he's giving two interpretations. He's saying, to say that this is just, praise which is stated to try to motivate people, but it doesn't actually really come true, and to think that this discussion, this praise, or the idea of Hari's name, this is just a fabricated idea. It's not a real thing. It's not that the name is really non-different than Krishna. It's not that the name really has the power to reveal Krishna. This is just some fabrication. To think like that. Or he's giving a second meaning, that fabrication can mean concoction of a different interpretation. In other words, to say that the meaning of Hari's name in a particular text or in a particular context is something other than what would be contextually plausible. So to say, when this Shastra talks about the importance of chanting Hari's name, it's really just talking about, having a good intention in your life. Therefore, just have good intentions and be nice to people. This is really the meaning of life. Just be a good person, Like, in other words, to take a specific statement and completely generalize it, or to reinterpret it in a way that's different than what it actually intends. This would be an example of the alternate interpretation that Sanatana's giving of this word fabrication. Or another instance would be if a name like Hari is given, then, or a name like Krishna is given, then there's some mention in some Puranas or even in the Vedas of asuras that also have those names. So to say, this name Krishna refers to this asura in the such and such Veda, or things like this would be instances of intentional misinterpretation. Okay, now we'll come to number 7. Quote, destruction of sin shall occur by taking the name because of the name's strength. Even the intent to sin, much less an act of sin, based on knowledge of the name's power, is an offense to the name. So he's saying, let alone committing an offense or committing a sin, thinking, I can just purify myself of it with the name. Even to intend or, plan to do so, that's also an offense. Alternately, by means of the elision of the letter A between namna and bolad, that is, in the case of interpreting the text to read namna abolad, that is, namno bolad, rather than namno bolad. The meaning is, one who has the intention of sinning not having understood the strength of the name, that is, thinking the name to be devoid of strength, commits an offense to the name. So if you read the text differently, then you could say, someone who commits sin, being ignorant of the name, that's also one type of offense to the name. In other words, to have no understanding or to disbelieve the statements in the Shastra that speak about the name's power to purify. Purification of him, that is, one who commits the aforementioned offense, certainly does not occur, quote, by means of regulations, that is, by observing numerous rites and so forth, or by means of the 12 niyamas beginning with non-violence, or ultimately, by means of numerous dharma rajas, that is, yama rajas, meaning even by undergoing the punishments inflicted by them for a long time. So this last interpretation is very extreme. In other words, how often do yama rajas change? Right? Not very often. So to undergo punishments from a series of different yama rajas means different, repeated cyclic re-manifestations of the lower planets within the universe, or of the whole of the material universe. So that's quite a long time. So to say that you won't be purified, even by all of that, is to make it very strong. And what that ultimately points out is that unless and until one forms the resolve to not live a deceitful, sinful life, and forms the resolve to live free from sin and only for the sake of service, whatever you do, it's not really going to get you out of the mess. So this is stressed with that interpretation. Okay, now we'll look at Jiva Goswami's point of view on these same statements. So he says the following: Then, defamation of the Shrutis and Shastras is as in the case of heretics, Pashandis, that is, worshippers of Dattatreya and Rishabdev, in accord with the path of heresy, i.e., it refers to the fundamental heresy of rejection of the authority of the Shrutis or other Shastras. So this is something Jiva Goswami also talks about in the commentary on the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, as well as in the Sarva-samvadani, where Dattatreya, as well as Rishabdev, these persons are regarded as avatars of Shiva and Vishnu. And even though they're regarded as avatars, their teachings are not regarded as authentic representation of the Shastra, because in their teachings they teach persons to not have full regard for the authority of the Shruti Shastra and other texts. So persons who follow those teachings are said here to engage in defamation of the Shrutis and Shastras because they fundamentally disbelieve in their authority. So to disrespect something is to deny the content of its character, to deny the substance of its very existence. So in that respect, this point is being made by Jiva Goswami. In other words, it's a disrespect to the Shastra to not accept it as authoritative. And even if one doesn't accept it as authoritative on the strength of teachers who are avatars, such as Dattatreya or Rishabdev, that still doesn't get you off the hook from fundamentally having disrespect and therefore being culpable of offense to the Shastra and therefore the name. So regard for the authority of Shastra, Shraddha in the Shastra, is essential to chanting the name without aparad. And as we hear Jiva Goswami when he's commenting on the stages by which prema self-manifests in the heart, in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the first stage is Shraddha, Sadhusanga, Bhajana Kriya, etc. And he defines Shraddha as Shastra Artha Vishwas, conviction in the meaning of Shastra. So without that fundamental conviction, then this process by which prema manifests is not actually taking place, because the first step hasn't even happened. So if there isn't that Shraddha in the Shastra, there's no unfolding of this manifestation of prema, and here we have the corollary because there's aparad to the name. So this is important to understand, and to have Shraddha in the Shastra means to follow it and regard it as the highest authority, and to regard even gurus and sadhus as responsible to and to be held accountable to the teachings of the Shastra. So to put faith in a guru or to put faith in a sadhu or a popular teacher over and above the Shastra is to lack sufficient regard for and conviction in the authority of the Shastra and in the meaning of the Shastra. In the Prem Bhakti Chandrika, Thakur Mahashaya has a line where he says, Shri Guru Bhakata Jan Tahar Charane Mon Aropiya Katha Anusare, that let me fix my mind at the feet of the Guru and the Bhaktas, following the Katha, following the word. So what does the word mean here? Does it mean the words of those gurus? Does it mean the words of those bhaktas? According to Vishwanath Chakravarti and his commentary on the Prem Bhakti Chandrika, he says katha means shastra katha anusare, that any following, any adherence to any guru has to be done according to the guidelines given in the Shastra. Even in the name of love or passion or affection or simplicity or what have you, one is not actually at liberty to have unlimited or blind or reckless faith in a guru that contravenes the guidelines for how the guru is to be followed given in the Shastra. So to put authority, to put regard for the guru over and above the Shastra is to leave the path of the bhajan taught by the Goswamis, is to leave the path of bhajan that frees one from namaparad. So Jiva Gosvami in the Gopal Champu, he has a description of 7 spears that pierce the heart. Or he speaks of 7 things that are painful to him, such as a spear in the heart. And one of them he describes as those persons who take shelter in the Guru but not in Hari. In other words, those persons who follow a Guru but don't do so as per the teaching of Hari himself as given in the Shastra. So to have reckless regard for a Guru without learning how a Guru is meant to be regarded by, as taught in the Shastra, to regard the theology that the Guru is meant to teach as enjoined in the Shastra, all of these things create disturbance to society because they create an aura of importance and emotion and excitement around a set of ideas that are not grounded in a well vetted, robust theological tradition, and which paved the way for persons whose intentions are not pure to rally up the support of many persons and then, in many cases, perform activities that turn out to be harmful to society, harmful to themselves, or harmful to their followers. So, faith in the meaning of Shastra, adherence to Shastra as the ultimate authority, under which bhaktas, under which gurus are responsible, or to which gurus are responsible, bhaktas are responsible, this will create a network and a set of balance and a set of, or you could say, checks and balances whereby a community of Vaishnavas can thrive and have clear and reliable principles upon which to engage in sadhana. So for all of these reasons, this point is given here in the Padma Puran, that to take to the path of heresy, to take to the path of disregard for the authority of Shastra, will preclude the ability of one to purely chant the name. Okay, without further elaboration, verse 5, or part 5, also, quote, praise, artavad, refers to considering, quote, this is mere praise. That is, opining that the Shastra's descriptions of the greatness of the name are mere hyperbole. 6. Fabricating, kalpanam, refers to thinking in another manner about the meaning of Hari's name for the purpose of making its greatness secondary. That is, construing the name of Hari to merely be figurative and opining that it is not actually inherently possessed of the meaning, greatness, and potency that the great ones, the Mahatmas, have experienced the names to manifest. As stated in the Vyasa Gita in Kurma Puran, quote, offense to Guru is 10 million times, is tens of millions of times worse than offense to the deity. But denial of knowledge, that is, intentionally reinterpreting Shastra so as to construe it as to be merely metaphorical, mythological, and the like, and disbelief in the Shastra are 10 million times worse than that. That is worse than offense to the Guru. So to commit aparad to the deity, this is an offense. Obviously, this is unacceptable. But to commit offense to the Guru is far worse. But far worse than offending the guru is disregarding the authority that gives the guru the status of being the guru. In other words, to disregard the authority and the standard by which the entire culture of deities and gurus and bhakti and sadhana and all these things exist. To deny, to misconstrue, or to disbelieve in the Shastra itself is the worst offense, far worse than offending the guru. So sometimes people think, oh, if I doubt what the guru says and it seems that what the Shastra says is right, I might make offense to my guru. No, the job of the guru is to teach someone the Shastra. It's his responsibility to relieve someone's doubts. And if someone has doubts and doesn't voice them, then one precludes their own learning. One denies themselves the chance to actually come to the right path and denies the chance to the guru to actually perform his duty of being the teacher of the meaning of the Shastra. And if one considers that it would be worse to question something that the guru says than to adhere to what the Shastra says, then they leave the line of the thought given here from the Kurma Puran by Jiva Gosvami, that to disbelieve the Shastra is far worse than offending the guru. So even if one is, on an unfortunate circumstance, has to do something different than what a guru may have said or instructed on some occasion, due to for whatever reason, some lack of accuracy in what was said in regard to the Shastra, then the true disciple will always follow what is enjoined in the fundamental authority of the Shastra and understand that whenever the matter can be discussed and clarified, that's what the guru would have always wanted as well, because the guru knows that his duty, as well as the disciple's duty, is always to live in accord with the fundamental authority and teaching of the Shastra, such that one can live in accord with the teaching and the will of Bhagavan himself, all based on the faith that the Gita, the Bhagavad, these other texts are to be regarded as of the authority of the will, the words of Bhagavan himself. So, this point is important. Now, number 7. In regard to namno balat, the 7th offense, although the destruction even of sin performed on the strength of the name shall occur by means of that very same name, still, if one performs a sinful act, which is an object of extreme repugnance, on the basis of that very same strength of the name, by which one has endeavored to attain the lotus feet of Sri Bhagavan himself, which are constituted of eternal being, consciousness, and intense bliss, and by nature the supreme Purushartha, then that is extreme ill-naturedness. So this is a nice contrast that he's pointing out here. That this name, which is non-different than Bhagavan, the embodiment of bliss, the embodiment of the ultimate possible attainment, that you're going to use that most blissful, most noble thing, you're going to turn that into some mechanism by which you can go do something which is an object of extreme repugnance? What greater foolishness, what greater misuse of something precious is there than that? So to do so, and to do so intentionally, shows that oneself is very insincere, oneself is of very ill mind, or, unfortunately conditioned mind. So in this case, one veritably misuses the name, and thus the incurrence of an offense 1,000,000 times far greater than that sin which one intended to use the name to absolve oneself of, most certainly ensues. In other words, if you commit a sin, okay, you committed a sin. But if you try to turn the most noble name of Bhagavan into some means by which you can escape culpability for that sin, that wickedness of trying to use Bhagavan's name for your supposed meager pseudo-pleasure of committing some sin, that is a very, very grievous attitude. That is a very, very detrimental attitude. So he's saying that offense is a crore of times worse than if you had just committed the sin just without trying to get yourself out of it by using Bhagavan's name. If you had just said, oh, I'm just going to sin, I don't care, that would have been a lot better than trying to use Bhagavan's name as a mechanism to enable yourself to sin without facing any consequence for doing so. So, he says, in this case, the non-occurrence of purification of him, that is, of such an offender of the name, by means of regulations, that is, the non-occurrence of purification of one such offender who has performed atonement by means of numerous restraints, regulations, and so forth, or of one such offender upon whom punishment has been inflicted even by numerous bearers of the staff, that is, Yamaraj, who have sequentially received the authority to punish offenders over the course of numerous cyclic manifestations of the material world, is certainly appropriate on account of only again constantly chanting the name being the atonement in this case, as per the forthcoming statement in Padma Puran, which we just mentioned a minute ago, quote, the names of Hari certainly destroy the sins of those who have committed offense to the name. Uttered incessantly, they are certainly effective. And on account of the law of suffering in the form of falling down being compulsorily applicable for one who has committed offense to the name, even though one otherwise may be possessed of bhakti to Bhagavan, as per the statement elsewhere in Padma Puran, quote, even one who has committed all types of offenses, that is, sins in general, is delivered from the consequences of those sins by taking shelter of Hari. And a reprobate among the two-legged who shall commit offenses even to Hari verily overcomes the consequences of those offenses on account of the name of Hari, should he at any time take shelter in the name. As a result of offense to the name of Hari, the well-wisher of all, however, one certainly falls down. So we read that verse in the last class. So he's giving two citations from the same chapter in the Padma Puran, where these 10 offenses are mentioned, where it explains that if you offend the name, then you don't get deliverance. So he's saying that it's only by rectifying oneself by means of the name that one can become free from the consequences of offenses. And then, therefore, even the punishments given out by Yamaraj for many kalpas won't be enough to purify you. It's, if you offend the name, you must get the mercy of the name. So this is the point he's making about the word yamai in the Padma Puran. So to intentionally use the name to enable yourself to try to commit sin without facing consequences, the only way to purify yourself of the ill-naturedness of using the name like that is to constantly worship the name. In other words, to constantly honor the name and never use it like that, but rather always treat it as an object of honor. That's the only way you're going to come right. So, having said that, we come to the Padma Puran verses that describe the 8th and 9th offenses. Quote, considering there to be equality of the name with all types of auspicious acts, such as dharma, rites, renunciation, and sacrifice, is also negligence in regard to the name, that is, an offense. Instructing one who is faithless, averse, or undesirous of hearing about the name is an offense to Shiva's name, alternately to the auspicious name of Sri Vishnu. So as we discussed in the previous class, here the name Shiva actually means Vishnu, as per Sanatana Gosvami's comment. So to think that chanting the name is no better than other forms of meritorious activities, and to tell or to teach or try to teach people who don't want to hear, who don't have any respect for the name, these are also offenses. So Sanatana Pad explains this as follows. Opining equality, that is equivalence of the name, with all sorts of auspicious acts beginning with dharma, is also negligence, pramad, meaning an offense to the name. Alternately, opining equality of auspicious acts beginning with dharma is one offense, and negligence, pramad, that is inattentiveness to the name, is also one. And thus here there are two offenses mentioned in this verse, in this half of the verse. So here he's giving an alternate interpretation, saying the word pramad could be interpreted as a mention of a separate offense. So in that case, to inattentiveness or to treat the name negligently is also regarded as an aparad. Furthermore, in that case of there being two offenses stated in the aforecited passage, the earlier passage, artavado harinamni kalpanam, should be considered to speak of only one offense. So because they conventionally say there are 10 offenses, if you interpret this statement regarding the 8th offense as two offenses, then he's saying in that case go back and interpret the statement artavado harinamna kalpanam as only one offense rather than two. And in his commentary, he gave both meanings of it being one or it being two. So in this way, there's some flexibility in how the text is read in Sanatan's view. Additionally, instructing a person who is faithless and so forth is an offense to Shiva's name. Mention of Shiva here is based on Sri Shiva's non-difference from Sri Bhagavan. And thus the implication is that instructing the faithless about the names of Shiva or of Vishnu is an offense to Vishnu's name. Okay, so that's Sanatana Gosvami's explanation. Now we have Jiva Gosvami. He's brief. He just says, then, in regard to the statement dharma vrata tyaga, equating the name with dharma and so forth is also negligence, meaning an offense occurs because of it. Then, after showing the offense that can be committed by a teacher of the name in the statement ashradadhane. So he doesn't offer any further elaboration on the meaning of the offense. He just shows that you can commit offense not just in the case of chanting the name, but also in the case of teaching about the name to others. So if this means that one has a responsibility to only speak about or only advise people to chant the name when one has enough understanding about the situation and the people you're talking to have a sufficient degree of confidence that by speaking or advising the persons to chant the name, that there won't be an untoward reaction to giving that advice. Which means one should have some knowledge of the mentality of the person before trying to tell them about the name, because without knowledge of their mentality, one can't be confident that the person won't react in a manner that's disrespectful or doesn't already harbor an attitude of aversion towards the chanting of the name. So all of this is to say that with whom one speaks about the name, that should be a person whose mentality is already known to the teacher, to the speaker, to some sufficient extent. And one should take care that these things are not discussed among persons who will not treat them with respect. Okay, so now we come to the 10th offense. And Sanatana Gosvami offers some elaborate discussion of this. So, the Padma Purana states, even after having heard about the greatness of the name, one who remains devoid of love for the name, vile, and someone for whom I, mine, and so forth are primary, is also an offender of the name. Okay, so Sanatan reads this as follows. Quote, being devoid of love, that is, shraddha or bhakti for the name, one for whom I, mine, and so forth are primary, that is, for whom egotism, possessiveness, and by the word and so forth, enjoyment of objects of the senses and so on, are primary, meaning predominant, and for whom taking the name, rather, shall not be such, that is, shall not be one's primary focus and engagement, is also an offender of the name. So this is quite a strong statement. If someone hears about the name, but then decides, nope, I'm going to continue with my absorption in experiences of the senses and my attachment to my full sense of self and possessiveness, and I'm not really concerned with any of these things, then that person also offends the name or disrespects the name. In other words, they've had the chance, they've encountered the name, they're aware of something to some extent of the importance of the name, but if they then intentionally disregard it, then they just disregarded the name. They just disrespected the name by not giving it the place in one's life that it is worthy of having. So, that's one interpretation. Now he continues. Alternately, there is only one offense stated in the half verse beginning dharma vrta, and one stated in this later half of the present verse under discussion, that is, aham mamāpi paramo. In this way, by means of various possible interpretations, there are 10 offenses stated in this chapter under discussion in Padma Puran, as per the statement here, quote, even after understanding them, those who do not immediately avoid these 10 offenses to the name are like children who become angry even with their mother, refuse to eat, and suffer as a result. So the Padma Puran itself states that it itself is listing 10 offenses in its text. So this is why the commentators offer these different interpretations, so that different meanings of the words can be appreciated and the number of total offenses listed can be kept at 10 in consistency with this statement here. But although it's not the primary reason for his citation, this point is also interesting, that as a child may get angry with its mother, refuse to eat, and then suffer for no reason other than simply falling under the sway of its own anger or its own ill state of mind, so too are the people who disregard the name. The name, as it was said, is the well-wisher of all, the friend of all living beings, who's offering such nourishment, such purification, such benefit to people. But if you say, no, I don't want this, I refuse it, I reject it, and then suffer as a result of doing such disrespect, then your situation is basically like a kid who's just being sour and not even appreciating the love of his own mother. In other words, there's no excuse for it. It's just your own fault due to your own unfortunate state of mind. Okay, now he gives a second interpretation. In that case, that is when the verse Shrutvapi Nama Mahatmyam is interpreted to describe 2 different offenses, the meaning is this. One who is devoid of love, priti for the name, is vile, meaning an offender of the name. Alternately, one who is vile and devoid of love for the name is an offender of the name, is the syntactic construction with the latter half of the verse. Further, the meaning of the second half of the verse, which is being interpreted here to describe a second offense, is as follows. One for whom I, mine, and so forth are primary, even in relation to the name itself. That is, one in whom primary, meaning predominant, is the attitude, quote, I am a very great chanter of the name. Kirtan of the name has been propagated especially by me, far and wide. Who else devoted to kirtan of the name is there equal to me? The name is verily under the control of my tongue. Or one for whom I, mine, and so forth are primary, even in relation to the name itself, means one who never performs kirtan of the name. That is, one who is so preoccupied with one's own egotism, possessiveness, enjoyment of the objects of the senses, and so on, that one never even engages in chanting the name. One who is of such nature is also an offender of the name. So he's giving 2 different interpretations in this second interpretation. So for one whose sense of I and mine is so prominent that the name gets no place in one's life, all one wants to do is be preoccupied with one's ego construct and its own attempts at self-aggrandizement. That's one type of offense. And the other type of offense is when that ego construct and that self-aggrandizement integrates with Vaishnava culture and integrates with the chanting of the name, such that one pursues an aggrandized sense of self and superiority to others and sense of greatness and so forth by means of engaging in chanting of the name. So, I've spread kirtan far and wide, I'm so great because I've done all of these things that have had so many effects on society, etc., etc. When one identifies with those activities, credits oneself for those effects or acts, and acquires a sense of arrogance or pride or inflated sense of self-importance because of the extent to which one engages in something related to the name, that also becomes an offense to the name. So if your sense of ego and possessiveness blocks out the name completely, that's one type of offense. If it tries to swallow the name and turn the name also into food for its own aggrandizement, that's an offense. And in the first bit, in the first interpretation, it is to say that if because of having those things, one lacks respect for the name, then that's also an offense. So in this way, Sanatana Gosvami gives a few different ways of reading the verse. So lastly, let's look at Jiva Goswami's interpretation. So he says the following. He, Sanat Kumar, states the offense which can occur on the part of the recipient of the instruction regarding the name, Shrutvapi. So that in Jiva Goswami's view, the 9th offense was an offense that can be committed by a teacher of the name. So the 10th offense is a name committed by a student or a person who hears about the name. So what is that? It says, because of being one for whom I, mine, and so forth are primary, that is, being one who is possessed of disregard for it, that is, the name of Hari, on account of being fixated principally upon egotism, possessiveness, and so on, is the meaning of the 10th offense. So one hears about the name, and maybe one doesn't directly show disrespect to it, but one is so preoccupied with their false sense of self and their notion of possessiveness based on that, that nothing changes, or the name finds no integration into their life, then that's also a disrespect to the name. So he goes on and says, the 10 offenses are also indicated by the word, quote, the heretical, pashanda, who are motivated by the body, wealth, and so forth in the statement in Padma Puran 4.25-24. Quote, be it with proper or improper pronunciation of syllables, one name of Bhagavan without separation, alternately, or even with separation of its syllables, which has entered one's speech, path of remembrance, or the base of the ears, certainly delivers a living being. This is certainly true. If that is the name of Bhagavan, should be cast down among those who are heretical out of greed, related to the body, wealth, or people, however, O Brahmana, it certainly does not become fruitful quickly here. In other words, the name is always potent, but that potency won't show up, or one won't see the expression of that potency anytime soon if one chants the name in a manner that is offensive. So, because of their being heretical, pashandamoy, that is, because of the offenses to the name being acts contrary to the teaching of the Shastra, so offense is equivalent to the idea of heresy, because offenses are activities censured by the Shastra. So to engage in activities that are censored by the Shastra is to show disregard for the authority of the Shastra, and one who shows disregard for the authority of the Shastra is considered a heretic or a pashandi. So therefore, the word heresy or being heretical is equivalent to the idea of offense. This is how Jiva Goswami is seeing the notion of offense mentioned in this statement in the Padma Puran that uses the word pashanda. Also, another offense of those of that type, that is, of the heretical, is stated in the Vaishak Mahatmya in Padma Puran. Quote, those people who disrespect kirtan of Bhagavan and leave places where it is being performed go to a fearsome naraka or hell because of this sinful act. There being no other atonement for all of these offenses, apart from further chanting of the name, is also stated in that very place in Padma Puran, just after the aforementioned 10 offenses were listed. So again, he cites the same verse that Sanatana Pad cited. Quote, the names of Hari certainly destroy the sins of those who have committed offenses to the name. Uttered incessantly, they are certainly effective. Here, in the case of an offense to a sadhu and so forth, that is, and to Bhagavan, his name, the Guru, and so forth, as mentioned in the list of the 10 offenses. So in other words, in the case of committing any of these 10 offenses, constant kirtan and so forth of the name, specially for the sake of satisfying them, that is, whomever has been offended, is appropriate. So he's prescribing the remedy for having committed offense. That is, enjoined as the appropriate means of rectification, because of the observance in the narrations of Ambarish and so forth, of offenses being forgivable only by them, that is, by the person in particular who was offended. As in the case of Durvasa Muni's offense to Ambarish Maharaj, not even Bhagavan himself could forgive Durvasa's offense. It was only when Durvasa Muni appealed directly to Ambarish Maharaj for forgiveness. So, to receive forgiveness of an offense, one has to receive the forgiveness from the person who was offended. So Jiva Gosvami is saying, how do you appease the person who was offended so as to bring about their inclination and their act of forgiving you? He's saying the best way to appease them is to engage in constant chanting of the name. In other words, show great respect to the name, and they who hold the name so dear and hold the name in such high regard will be moved to forgive you when they see that you're engaging in such a fine and honorable activity as showing such regard for the name. But the intent here is not that you just chant the name and it doesn't matter what the Vaishnava thinks. That's not what Jiva Goswami is teaching. He's saying if you offend the Vaishnava, you need the forgiveness of that Vaishnava. But why should that Vaishnava forgive you? If you just go and say, oh, forgive me, then why will he take you seriously? Why will he consider you worthy of forgiveness? If he sees that you're constantly chanting the name to demonstrate your repentance and to demonstrate your sincerity of your resolve to not sin in the future, then you have grounds, then he has means to say, yes, this person is worthy of forgiveness. Because forgiveness given to someone who doesn't deserve it is like milk to a snake. It just enables them to carry on further with their own detrimental actions. So, to what extent forgiveness is to be given, to what extent discipline is to be exercised, all of these things have to be evaluated in every individual case. But when someone takes to constant chanting of the name, this indicates that extensive discipline is not needed to be applied because there's nothing more purifying than chanting the name, and they're doing that very thing. So in this sense, it's an integrated aspect of seeking the forgiveness of a Vaishnava in the case of having offended a Vaishnava, not a means of not having to be accountable to the person who has offended for one's offense. Okay, so there's just a little bit left here. It is also stated in the Nam Komudi, quote, the only mitigation of offense to a great one, or a mahat, is suffering the reactions of the offense or his favor. That is, receiving the forgiveness of the person who was offended. So he's reiterating the same point. Therefore, because of the absence of any other means, it was rightly stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.1.11, as cited at the beginning of this Anucheda, quote, this continuous kirtan of Hari's name, wherein there is no fear from anywhere, is enjoined for the indifferent, the desirous, and the yogis. In other words, it's the best thing that anybody, whatever their situation may be, can do. So, in that way, we have Jiva Goswami and Sanatana Goswami's explanations of the 10 offenses, as well as a brief review of how offenses to the name are mitigated. So, just a little bit left here. In brief, the offenses spoken of here in Padma Puran refer to various forms of irreverence towards Bhagavan, his name, his manifest form as the Guru, his bhaktas, and the Shastra. And all such offenses, in gist, are simply acts which are not pleasing to Bhagavan, and which condition the mind in a manner that is contrary to bhakti to Bhagavan. When the mind is conditioned in this contrary manner, then no anurāga for Bhagavan's name can manifest therein. So this is connecting this whole discussion back to the verse of the Shikshastakam. Durdaivam īdṛśam ihājani nānurāgaḥ. My durdaiva, my misfortune, is that I have no anurāga, no prema for the name. So why not? Because I have offense. And what is offense? It's something that conditions the mind in a way that precludes the appearance of prem. A mind with prem cannot be offensive. A mind that's offensive cannot have prem. The mind can't be conditioned to both at the same time. So if one has committed aparad in the past, the effect of that will remain in the form of conditioning in the mind, and that conditioning in the mind is the very thing which is inhibiting prema from appearing and impelling the mind to act according to its manner of functioning, or the vrittis of the sarup-śakti. So these two things cannot coexist. If the mind is conditioned by aparad, it has to be unconditioned of aparad, such that prem can then condition the mind under its influence. So because these things are mutually exclusive, one will not experience prem until one becomes purged of offense. So the last thing we'll discuss is a statement of Jiva Gosvami where he looks at the effects of aparad, or how one can infer and understand that one has this misfortune that Mahaprabhu is talking about in this verse. How one can know that in one's past lives one has committed aparad, even though we have no remembrance of those lives. We can understand that the cause is there if the effects are present. So if we've committed offense in the past, then the effects of those things will exist in the mind in the present. So here he gives a list of 5 things which are the effects of having committed aparad in the past. So if we find any of those things in our mind, we know that in the past we must have performed the action that causes those things to exist in the present. So we'll conclude with this. When the mind is conditioned in this contrary manner, then no anurāga for Sri Bhagavan's name can manifest therein. Rather, as Sri Jiva has explained, numerous unfavorable attitudes take root in the psyche as a consequence of committing offense. Quote, if crookedness, faithlessness, absorption in other objects that erodes fixity in Bhagavan, slackening in bhakti, and pridefulness in one's acts of bhakti and so forth, and other such behaviors are difficult to abstain from, even by means of bhakti in the form of association with mahatmas and so forth, then they are effects of one's aparad committed in this life, and indicators of that is aparad committed in the past, that is, in past lives. So now he gives more detail on these 5 elements. Externally performing worship of and so forth of Bhagavan, Sri Guru, his bhaktas, and others, even while bearing disrespect and so forth toward them, internally, is called crookedness, kautilya. So in other words, if one sees that it's advantageous for some worldly purpose to act like a bhakta and show respect to a deity or a famous sadhu or bhaktas in one's neighborhood or what have you, but internally one doesn't actually respect them and one isn't actually showing respect to them because they deserve respect, but rather just for some social benefit that showing that respect creates, then that is called crookedness. That is called an insincere or a deceitful attitude. Second, the absence of conviction in his greatness, and so forth, even when it is seen or heard of, as a result of contrary opinion and so forth. For example, assumption of deception, assumption of impossibility, etc., is called faithlessness. So, there are instances in Krishna Lila where various persons, even after seeing great expressions of Bhagavan's potency, of his Aishwarya, still they thought, no, this isn't, Krishna's not really Bhagavan, he's not really Vishnu. This is like some illusory trick. He did some tapasya, he has some power, but he's not really Bhagavan. And he's just showing this power because he's attached to his royal seat, or he's, under the sway of his relatives and trying to get favor for them, or they make up some assumption about him being ill-motivated, or they make up some story about how the power that they're seeing is not really divine. Like this, they assume, and they don't have conviction in the actual divinity that they perceive, even when they see it. And moreover, those who hear Shastra, or hear about the Leela of Krishna, but don't come to have faith in it, they too, similarly, have such a mentality as a consequence of past aparad. Excuse me. Then, slackening in bhakti is that by which fixity upon pleasures and pains related to the self and so forth, that is, related to one's body and mind, related to other living beings, and related to natural phenomena, increases. So, if one becomes excessively preoccupied with these material things, such that there is slackening in one's practice of bhakti, that also is a consequence of having committed offense in the past. Then, pridefulness in one's acts of bhakti and so forth is created by offense, because of it, that is, such pridefulness, being a cause of other offenses, such as disrespecting Vaishnavas. So this is an interesting line of logic, which it can be explained as follows. Because an act that is not an effect of an offense will not give rise to a further effect that is an offense, pridefulness in one's own acts of bhakti is inferred to be an effect of an offense, since it leads to an offense, such as disrespecting Vaishnavas. So the topic of pride and conceit or arrogance, this will come up in the next verse regarding the procedure by which the name is meant to be chanted. So finally, in conclusion, since offenses, aparadas, condition the mind in these manners that are so antithetical to prema for Sri Bhagavan, Sriman Mahaprabhu concludes the verse under discussion by saying, "My misfortune is that no anurāga for your names has arisen in me." So in that way we can understand this expression of humility on the part of Mahaprabhu, which can be taken as an expression of his own humility as he's absorbed in the bhava of a bhakta, and can be understood as a teaching that he's giving for the sake of jivas conditioned in samsara, such that they can recognize the presence of the effects of their own past aparad. They can feel remorse for that, they can feel hankering for prema for the name, they can feel regard for the greatness of the name, they can form and foster greater perseverance in resolve to appropriately chant the name, such that that prema for Bhagavan may come into their hearts. So that's where this verse goes, and the next verse here in Padyavali is also the very next verse in the Shikshastakam, the third verse, Trinadapi Sunichena, which is all about the process by which one should chant the name, which is, there's another way of saying, the process of chanting the name by which one can be free from aparad. So it's only by constant chanting that this name will purify oneself of one's past offenses. So how to chant in that constant manner that leads to the freedom from or purification of offenses. It's not just a repetitive mechanical repetition of the words, it's continuous chanting, maybe not 60 seconds a minute, every minute, 24 hours a day, but it's continuous, repeated, regular chanting in the manner that is free from further offense and in a way that doesn't nurture or further the tendency to commit offense in the future. So the manner in which to chant and the understanding that's required to execute that manner of chanting, that's what we'll discuss in the commentary on the next verse, which is the very core, the very spirit of being a Vaishnava sadhaka. So a very, very important subject and a very, very well-known verse, Trinadapi Sunichena Tarori Vasahishnuna Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sada Hari. So starting from the next reading, we will dive into this all-important teaching of Sriman Mahaprabhu. Vaishnavebhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe Shyam.